Welcome back, everyone. It's my very great pleasure now to introduce to you all Donna Benjamin, a passionate advocate of free and open source software. Over the last 2 decades, they've seen how open, agile, hybrid, and distributed ways of working, thinking, and organising human collective endeavour have literally changed everything. In today's talk, Donna will explore these ideas and how we might continue to pursue positive, open, and inclusive change for the future. Please welcome Donna.
Thank you, Fiona. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and just take a beat, feel deep time. But we're all here now, so let's move on. If you have a device handy, please feel free, and don't if you don't want to, grab that QR code and it will take you straight there, or go to slido.com and enter in that number. I'll have a little bit of audience participation and a little bit of audience feedback. So, what I want to do before I get into it is, of the 3 talks that you could be in right now, why this one? And what do you hope to get out of it today? Why did you come to my talk, and what are you hoping to get out of it today? Now, this is not a test of you. This is just to give me a bit of a sense of what's going on. And also, I apologise in advance if I totally fail to meet your expectations, which is highly likely. So this is about expectation management. Please lower them. No, not low enough, lower. A little bit lower. Okay, good. All right, we're all good. So yeah, just feel free to, jump in there, put in a few thoughts, or completely ignore it. You are free agents. So with that, I made this promise to the conference and to you about what I was going to talk about today. My title, Open, Agile, Hybrid, and Distributed, and that's the abstract that I wrote. And then I got accepted and went, yeah, well, So let's see where we end up, right? We live in revolutionary times. That's the assertion that I made. But what do we mean by revolution? I don't want you to think about the nasty ones, like where people lost their heads. Don't think about that. Think about scientific revolutions and how knowledge has changed. I found this great article by this chap called Thornton May, who's apparently a futurist, always an interesting term, but IT and the forever revolution, that actually the world of technology is in constant change and constantly having an impact, right? So I think that was interesting. But also just understanding revolution, and not just the kind of big bit that kind of makes news headlines or the history books, but the before, and more importantly, the after. What happens after a revolution when everything has changed and we're living in a new normal, a phrase we may have heard a little too often of late. So we live in revolutionary times. What does revolution mean? And do we really? So this is more about questions than answers. So a few different things to think about that. I like this. Radical idealism and its tragic consequences. So when we started, our tools were playthings, hobbies. Again, an assertion that I made in my abstract. So hopefully you managed to get into Slido, and now I'd like you to join the quiz. So I just want to test a couple of those ideas in that assertion. That's gone one too far. One too far? Where did it go? All right, everything goes heavily. Okay, people, hello, great. So what were our tools? I'm missing one of my questions here. Oh well. What were our tools? So when we started, our tools were playthings, hobbies. What were our tools? I'll give you a moment. I'll get a sign. I'll kind of intuit a sign from the audience when a majority of you have completed the task. People still mostly heads down, or they're tweeting, or they're going, this is rubbish, why am I here? All right, Let's see. Are we ready? Is anyone like, no, I'm not done? All right, okay. Oh, I must be going in the wrong direction. Let's try that again. Oh. Gremlins. No, it's not giving me the answers. All right, fine. I'm just going to continue on. So when we started, our tools were playthings and hobbies. And what we missed, the first question I had is, well, when did we start? We'll do this by hand. I said, was it 1983? Was it 1998? Or was it 1.5 million years ago? Or D, all of the above?
So one, I would say that it's not just playthings, it's just a part of our human evolution. And it started when we were crawling through the primeval slime and becoming what we are today.
Love it. To repeat for the live stream and the recording, it wasn't just playthings. It was when we crawled out of primeval slime. Yes, lovely. Okay. So yes, when did we start? Well, probably when we became human. But with open source, there's this idea of the accidental revolutionary of Linus Torvalds, and he named his book Just for Fun. So there was this sense of experimentation and fun and just kind of learning and figuring things out at the start. But we've moved on, and now, okay. So this idea of fun, how and why was it fun? What was fun about it? Who was it fun for? Was it fun for everyone? Was it equally fun for everyone? So this idea of open source and like Linus's kind of almost famous words when he released it is that, this won't be big and famous or anything. It's just a hobby. It's just for fun, as his book was titled. But it was the seed that, that was planted, which has grown into something which can sustain conferences like this week, but conferences like this all around the world. And that was sustained even when things got difficult and we couldn't meet in person. There were online versions. So a seed was planted which created this thing which has led to everything open, which we've been talking about this week. So give me some thoughts. How and why was it fun?
We learn through play. It's a huge part of how humans learn, and so the play aspect is always going to be connected to fun at certain times. It doesn't always connect to fun, but it's the linkages are so clear.
Beautiful. Kat has said we learn through play, and the linkages
Are very clear between play and fun, although not always.
And the linkages are clear between play and fun, although not always. Nice. Yes. Yes. We learn. Yes.
Like for me, open source was this like slightly subversive thing that you did outside your corporate job and it was fun. And
Yeah, Tatiana, repeat. Yeah, no, say.
yeah, so working in like enterprise kind of setup, Linux and open source or foss was just kind of fun in the sense of this is something I did after hours, and it was slightly subversive.
Slightly subversive. I like that, especially in the context of we live in revolutionary times. Okay, thank you. So from fun to fundamental infrastructure, our tools, open source, now powers the planet. It has become kind of almost ubiquitous. And with that comes a level of responsibility that perhaps we didn't necessarily sign up for at the beginning when we released some code into the commons for people to use. So I got these 4 words in my title. Open is the first one, and we've been at a conference, not most of the week, called Everything Open. This is from the Free Software Project, talking about the different kinds of open, the contrast with free software, non-free software, released private software. But open source is probably one of the kind of fundamental opens in Everything Open. But we've heard about others this week, And our lovely keynote yesterday from Seb Chan, he had this slide up, and I thought, I've got to add that in. Open collections, open curation, open source. What are the other opens? And I just kind of trawled the program trying to kind of summarise some of the different opens we've been talking about over the past 3 days. They were some that I could clearly see, but are there others? I want to, shout out, are there other opens that we've talked about, we've heard about, we've learnt about, we've puzzled over? Open hardware, big one. Monday there was a whole kind of stream, a whole activity about open hardware. Any others? It's one that I haven't heard about, but I've heard about in other contexts of open leadership and how that differs from just leadership. And I think that little phrase I just used, how that differs, how do any of these differ from the thing without open in front? In some cases, open is becoming the default. In others, it's still woof, like Kat's just spoken about with open education resources and how difficult it is for some of the people in the academic space to accept and understand what open means and what open means for them. I think it's really interesting. I'm so delighted by, when this conference was announced. Oh yeah, everything open. Okay, let's go, let's rock. So yeah, open, thinking about that. From open, I want to move into Agile and the Agile Manifesto, coming back to revolutions, right? The Agile Manifesto. Now, hands up if you have heard of the Agile Manifesto and the bunch of blokes who hung out in a ski chalet 22 years ago and came up with this and put up the world's worst website.
No lies detected.
AgileManifesto.org has not changed, but it's really, the individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. These things have become very common. And I like to say that I think about open source and agile methodology as the twin revolutions of technology. And together, they have both had this massive impact. If we compare what we think of as the world of technology today with what it was in, say, the 1970s and the 1980s and the way software was created then, it's a bit different. And I think that these two kind of threads are responsible for that change. Maybe that's a bold statement, but it feels right to me. But yet, they have a lot in common, but the communities are completely different. Like if you go hang out at Agile events, they're real different to open sourcey kinds of events. And yet so much of what we do and where we, the worlds that we work in are similar. So I think that's another interesting thread. So we've impacted each other, but perhaps indirectly rather than directly. So from Agile, I wanted to acknowledge that it's also become a really dirty word. Used and abused and misused a lot. A lot. So I went back to the etymology. And this, I always love this, right? You get into it. Oh, Old Norse says to drive. Middle Irish to battle. But the bit up here, it's probably too small for you to read, but to set in motion and to keep in movement. Movement. Also back to revolution. To keep in movement. And I think also to keep in movement, you have to have some degree of sustainability. You can't sprint all the time. Maybe that's a bit of an anti-agile, right, in some ways, but to keep in movement, you have to have some element of sustainability. So also think back to that picture of planet Earth and how we power our planet and how some things are kind of killing our planet, like fossil fuel-driven climate change, but how open source, open code and communities are also tackling those kinds of challenges. Anyway, I digress. Agile, the etymology, back to what does that word really mean? There's also another meaning. Maria the Doberman does agility training. It's just a very physical thing about having, being agile and agility training. And what does that mean, right? Let's really kind of pull these words apart before we put them back together. But there was a before the blokes at the ski chalet came up with the Agile Manifesto. I found this article some time back and I absolutely loved it. It talks about the work of Sister Corita Kent, talking about an art room and rules for art, and Octavia Butler. These women wrote about creativity, collaboration in ways that sort of very much echoed in the values and the principles of the Agile Manifesto, much further ago in the past. And there was this one line at the end of the article. They talk about opening doors rather than selling keys. And I think that's one, talk about Agile being a bit of a dirty word. It's become this kind of Agile industrial complex of frameworks and certifications and paying lots of money to people to get your tick. But there's something in it which goes back further in history and is useful, I think. So from that buzzword to the next, hybrid. Hybrid. My current employer and fabulous sponsor of this conference talks about the open hybrid cloud. What does that mean? I drive a hybrid car, one of them. It's actually that colour too. I'm really interested in how we're going to do hybrid events and hybrid workshops. Talking about, the online versus the in-person and that kind of messy in-between with this hybrid. And hybrid, ways of working. We've got team members who are, my next word, distributed, remote, virtual. I don't like using the terms virtual or remote. So remote makes it sound like they're far away and something wrong with them. And virtual makes it sound like they're not real. But distributed, I think, is a good word to describe when we have people who are scattered through time and space, whether it's time zones, whether it's geography, but they are distributed. Distributed is also a word we've used in the Linux community, well, a version of distribution, distributions of Linux. So this idea of distributed is one that I think is also kind of becoming part of our new normal. I'm not actually expecting any of you to read all of those little words. It was kind of like a brain dump of stuff that I was gathering together. So open, agile, hybrid, and distributed. Ways of working. I love this picture. Telegraphists in Melbourne in the olden days. This very specific time, the olden days. But ways of working, all of those 4 words, right? They're some of the things that have changed, and part of the revolution is there were some people who have always worked in a distributed way. But then there came everybody through COVID and lockdowns and figuring out how to work together online through time and space. But also adopting agile ways of working as opposed to whatever it was that you were doing before. The waterfall or very prescriptive. Here were plans that came from on high, like Moses' tablets, and now you go through iterations to implement them. The ways of working is something that has also changed, that open and agile have impacted. But not just ways of working, also ways of thinking. And I was a little bit inspired by Edward de Bono with those 4 words and using them as a provocation against each other. He has a thinking tool where he introduces a random word in association with whatever the topic of the day is. Throw in a random word to just sort of, startle your brain kind of firing in a different way, and it can spark new ideas when you just introduce a different word. So that's part of what Poe is. And this idea of going beyond yes and no, beyond the binary. What else? And. But ways of thinking are also challenged by what open source has done and what Agile brought when it sort of started to change the kind of dominant way of doing things, right? So we have to also interrogate the way we use our brains. in our day-to-day work, and not necessarily go for the obvious answer. Look for a second or third or fourth answer that could help us move forward. So all of those things add up to how we organise ourselves to get stuff done, or a fancy way of human collective endeavour, get stuff done. I think the open source community and movement and all of the opens that we've been talking about are an example of human collective endeavour, right? We do it together, and that's what makes it so successful. But it's not the only thing like that. So I wanted to kind of find a few other examples of human collective endeavour, or getting stuff done, or changing the world. Ending apartheid in South Africa. There's obviously a pretty famous kind of figurehead for that, but there was a real global effort to support that work. A recent one, the United Nations has this historic agreement on the law of the sea and preserving marine biodiversity in international waters. So much of the seas are, associated with particular countries, like, the a certain distance away from our shores as Australian waters, but in that space, in those in-betweens, in the international space, they've made this historic agreement to treat it a bit like Antarctica. I think it's 30% of international waters must now be conservation zones. It's huge. So much time and effort, and goodness knows how much bureaucracy to get that done. Human collective endeavour. The Green Revolution in India in the 1960s, made a massive impact on India and their ability to feed the growing population, but not just feed, but go from a net importer to a net exporter. Huge, but also huge negative impacts. They've lost entire native species of food crops. It's been, the industrial complex of agriculture has come in and done away with the livelihoods of many farmers in India, and there's been a real downside. So it's kind of like, again, we talk about revolutions and what came before and what needed to change, the revolution, but then what comes afterwards. Again, the word hybrid, different context here. Hybrid's also the result of two things coming together and then the progeny not being able to have any future, right? That sort of... So hybrid's not necessarily always perhaps the positive buzzword that some might want us to think of. Also, this is really stupid now, but a liger, I think a lion and a tiger, anyway. Hybrids. And this was an example of a human collective endeavour out of COVID, which I just thought was fantastic. Open hardware, collaboration. The start of the pandemic in Australia, there was no, it was very hard to get protective gear, impossible in some cases, and some enterprising humans got together and said, how could we make some of this stuff? And did laser cutting and design, all this kind of stuff, and came up with this, which was really cheap and really fast to create. The rapid shield from Space Tank, very cool. And then all of that coming together into ways of thinking, ways of working, and the ways of organising all that effort, right? I wanted to call this out because Rusty Russell, the founder of Carlu, the conference before this, talked about he had his role as the trivial patch monkey, and all these little patches that were going to the Linux kernel, but they were so trivial that and unimportant and low priority that they could get missed. So he said, all right, well, I'll gather them up and get them into the kernel. Tell me if I'm wrong here, people who know. But anyway, the thing I like about this is when many people do one small thing, those minis add up to a whole lot of work that contributes, but also saves the effort of the people doing the heavy lifting, and allows them to focus on what only they can do. So I think why I wanted to bring this in is we start to think through open, agile, hybrid and distributed ways of working, thinking and organising, is that there is a role for all of us. Think more like bees and ants, we can all pick up a little piece and add to it. It doesn't have to be the big earth-changing thing from the start, but little things add up and make a difference. And I also asserted that this had literally changed everything. And my partner said, "Really, Donna?" Okay, maybe just metaphorically. Maybe it hasn't changed everything. But not everything is open, and not all change is good. And Ben, we shared this on the socials, and I just went, oh yeah. That tells a whole lot of stories of bad stuff, just not very good things. And there's some books over on the left about what goes into the technology that we use and its impacts and its biases. I've always found the title, ever since I heard it, Algorithms of Oppression, as a very visceral kind of reaction to that. It's like, oh yeah, that's a good way of putting some nasty, framing up some of that nasty stuff. Algorithmic siege on our humanity. That seems very dramatic, but it kind of is, right? Just seen the Royal Commission into robo-debt. I think that sums that up pretty well. So not everything is open, and not all change is good. So they're the threads that I was trying to kind of pull together, that abstract at the start. And this is where I'm going to stop doing the work and ask all of you to do some of the work. Let's examine some of these threads. Or maybe these threads? Or these threads? So get your devices again, and let's explore where and how these threads intertwine. So open, agile, hybrid, distributed ways of working, thinking and organising, right? I've kind of set the scene for you to kind of have a mess in your mind about these things. Hopefully we will get from mess to really nice Celtic knots instead of mess. So bring up that tool again, and hopefully this time, nope, back. Hopefully this time it'll work. Tell me if it's not. One participant typing. Okay, good. That's a signal. That's a signal. So how do you see the threads of open, agile, hybrid, and distributed intertwine? And how am I going for time? I'm good. So I'm also going to just encourage you to, don't get frightened, talk amongst yourselves. So you can go straight into just answering the question, but also huddle, just turn around, the person next to you, the person behind you, start saying some words. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to hear the zeitgeist of the room. No talking. Typing. All typing. Acceptance of things, people, places that are different, human behaviour. I think I'm doing this by feel. I see you. Do they intertwine in my, is this just madness on my part? Are these completely disconnected, random things? Or is there commonality between these threads? Do they intertwine? Do they interconnect? How do they impact each other? Ooh.
I mean, it depends, right? It's context. You put all of the words together and then, yes, they correlate. But if you look at any of the words individually, they don't necessarily correlate. You could have open discussed in a way that
Yes, nice. Do a summary of that.
The context matters, so all the words coming together have an impact and essentially make them a messy, intertwined thing by saying them all together. Looking at agile individually or distributed individually don't necessarily mean anything connected to each other, but when you put them in a sentence together or in a context together or in a workplace together or a presentation or a thing online together, then your brain links all of the things.
Yeah, the brain sort of does the magic, doesn't it? When just by putting two things side by side, it's going to try and make a connection. Yeah, thank you. It's like showing behind the curtain there. Yes, really nice. All right, I'll give you just a minute more to finish off if there's still kind of fingers tapping and thumbs thumbing. Is that a thing? Agile is something of a subset of lean. Foss is terrific at aspects of lean, such as eliminating waste, yes, and doing everything just in time. And humans generally work better with distinct rules instead of how they naturally would. It's interesting. Make a framework and we will follow it. To a certain extent, I like the caveat built in there. But corporations will definitely enforce it, hence our revolutions. Nice. Oh, I like this. The thread made me think how all our tech and modern society still depends on a lot of very old, proven and basic technologies. Yes, nice. Oh, this is great. Thank you. Please feel free to keep going. I'm going to move on, though, because we're going to run out of time. I really wanted to spark some ideas and thinking and maybe a little bit of friction. Right? There's a lot of assumption at something like this that tech is good. We keep hearing where it's not, but I think we also all have privilege, as Lindsay said this morning, to do something about it when it's not. And I like to think that you also have agency to embark on doing good stuff. So I want to leave you with a question. And it was in the abstract all along. How might we not think about the problems and the badness and the not everything is open and not all change is good, but how might we continue to pursue positive, open and inclusive change? How might we ensure that the work we do is a net benefit to humanity and not doing bad stuff and making us cringe? How do we do that? How might we engage in that? I don't know, but I am optimistic. Well, I'm more than optimistic. I am convinced that collectively we have the skills, the values, the capacity to do it. And with that, I want to invoke the great Jane Goodall, primatologist, this famous images of her working with the gorillas, chimpanzees. I'm going to read this. I don't generally like reading slides, but you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference. But here's the important bit. You have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Thank you. Feel free to ping me if you want to, but we've also got a little bit of time if you've got any, not just questions, but if you've got any comments. If you want to say, Donna, you're a mad woman. What have you just put us through for the last half an hour? That's okay too. But like I said at the start, I wanted to kind of get a sense of why did you come to this? And I'm going to learn from that. and understand that. And hopefully I managed to lower your expectations at the start so that you're not all really sad now. Are there any questions?
I would be very surprised if anybody in this room was sad after having been so challenged and engaged. But are there questions and comments and engagements and provocations for Donna now?
That was fantastic, Donna. Thank you. I was really excited when I read this abstract and reviewing it, and expectations met and exceeded. Fantastic. Thank you. You mentioned like ways of thinking and coming up with different answers and continuing to try and think of answers. But I also think, and this presentation is a really good example of this, is coming up with different questions.
Yes.
Framing,
Yes.
right, is also about ways of thinking and applying different people's perspectives to the work you're doing or the problem you're trying to solve is just as important, if not more so, than just coming up with different answers to the same old question.
Yes. And what you've just said also makes me think about how too often we don't think enough about the problem before we start to solve it. And sometimes we assume we have an answer or a solution. And some of my colleagues are really good at, like, we've got the solution to all your problems. I was recording. I should be careful. But do we actually understand the problems that we're trying to tackle? Do we spend enough time? I think Einstein's got a really famous kind of quip about, you've got to spend 95% of the time on the problem or something before you try and find the answer. But I think, like you say, you've got to ask more questions to uncover what it is that we're actually trying to solve and not go chasing a solution to the wrong thing. Yeah, thank you, David. Nice one. Tatiana and Fiona running with the mic.
I had a lawyer ask me this, and in a way I quickly gave an answer, but then I really, really thought about it afterwards. So So we were basically proposing a solution to someone, and she said, well, in what way is it better than a lawyer sitting down with them and going through their problem with them and then, giving them, like an appropriate kind of response and maybe a legal remedy to go with it? And my quick answer was, nothing can replace that individual human attention, but you can scale that with technology. But then I thought, no, maybe there are other answers to this. So I would love to hear from you or from anyone in the audience, like what those answers might be. Like basically, what's better than like individual human attention?
Wow. So for the recording, what's better than individual human retention?
And I mean in terms of like providing a technical solution.
For providing a technical solution.
Yeah, good. It's a good question. In some ways, I think it's not that it's better. Tatiana and I were talking, so I had a bit of insight into the system that she's sort of talking about and creating an application, an app that can help people get some very basic legal kind of guidance through various processes and stuff, rather than having to call a helpline to get that individual attention, right? So that's the context that I understand you're sort of referring to there. And I think it's like, is it better? Not necessarily, but does it free people to do other things? Then yes. So it's not that it's better for that person, but it's maybe giving them a quick response and saving resources in other ways. So I think that also speaks to the have we understood the problem? Like if someone says, well, how is that better than? It's like, well, is that the best question to tease out what they're trying to, how they're trying to understand what it is you're working with? I think that's a really interesting question. Yes. Yeah, please.
I was just thinking about this from our context. We get people come to us with I want this technical solution, and maybe we have to have those one-on-one conversations. And I'm like, but what are you actually trying to achieve? I get that you want a virtual machine and you want 12 gig of RAM and someone's told you that you need 100 gig of space, but what are you actually trying to do? Because maybe that technology is not the best solution for you. And just extrapolating out on what you're thinking about with the lawyer having the one-on-one, I feel like the growth and asking the questions and discussion and conversation is the best way of getting a response to things, because everybody has a different point of view. So I would challenge that better than having the one-on-one with the lawyer would be a community or a group conversation where you're going to get diverse views and diverse perspectives and diverse information and knowledge sets, so that it opens up a conversation, so that maybe the information or the problem that they're trying to solve would be more well informed from different people within the group as opposed to one specialised lawyer in this instance.
Thank you. Yes.
But extending from that is that still is human resourcing. It's bringing together a community of people in the same space at the same time and having experts in that time and space. It has limitations, whereas the technical solution broadens the equity of accessing that same information more quickly. Maybe not as strongly or in as an understood way, but I think the equity element is so important in that space.
Yes, nice. Well said. The equity, like, so again, not better, but is it broadening the access and giving more people the ability to get the benefit of that service or offering? Yeah, nice one.
Thank you, Donna, for, you know what, I feel like you got the best slot of the conference because this thread is just winding it all up and bringing in so many different kinds of open. So, I mean, nice work with the programming. and yeah. So, also, this is going to be a bit more of a comment than a question. Or perhaps it's a reflection. It pinged in my mind when you started that first question about when did this start? Was it, in the 70s or the 80s or way back in the primordial soup, or all of the above? And I really like the all of the above part because that's true. Like, we're always beginning, we're always becoming, and that actually is from my experience, is a thread in queer theory about, like, identity is not static. It is always a process of becoming, and that's what I think that we're doing here. Even though we like to shy away from that idea of let's not reinvent the wheel, by putting attention into that sort of that centre of where our values are, that kind of attending to that gravity, I think that can be a really useful kind of magnet around, what our attention orbits.
Nice. Gravity, magnets, and attention orbiting. Very nice. But no, it's not a question and a comment, but I like the way that you've kind of brought those elements together, because, too much of what we do at a conference like this is just a sort of window, like the play school windows into a particular world. And I was kind of glad that I got the last slot to be able to kind of draw on what I've seen through those windows. So no, thank you. I think that's really nice. Thank you.
Well, we are at time, so I hope you will continue all of these conversations over afternoon tea, but please join with me in thanking Donna one more time.
Thank you.